Hi, welcome to another episode of NYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Greg Forster, who's the president and CEO of the National VOAD Network. VOAD actually stands for Voluntary Agencies Active in Disasters. So stay tuned as I talk to Greg about how VOADs work in the US, how other countries like Japan and Canada are adopting this type of network, and how you can get involved. So stay tuned. Hi, Greg. Nice to see you today.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, before we get started, can you just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, your background?
Certainly. So Greg Forster, so I'm a retired New York State Trooper. I worked for 10 years in upstate New York. Got involved in disaster work through my father-in-law. He's a United Methodist pastor. He decided he needed a security person for a team he was taking to Haiti back in 1995. Asked if I would join to make sure he could bring back the same number of people he took with him, and off to Haiti I went. Through that experience, we were building a welding shop in Port-au-Prince area in Haiti. I came back from there, and 6 months later, I left state police work, started leading humanitarian aid trips all over the world through the United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
I then took over what they call the Northeastern jurisdiction for the Methodists. For humanitarian aid groups. So I had 8,000 churches in the Northeast that I helped facilitate mission with. And so for 13 years, I led teams all over, 42 different countries. I was averaging about 6,200 teams a year. And then we got involved very heavily domestically in disaster following Katrina. And so I worked pretty much every disaster in the U.S. from 1999 through 2013. Through what's called Volunteers in Mission with the United Methodist Church. And then we had a little disaster in upstate New York where I was living with Hurricanes Irene and Floyd hit simultaneously back to back along the Pennsylvania and New York border. And it was about 45 minutes from my house. I wasn't technically in charge of disaster for the Methodists at that point in time, but just couldn't ignore what the need was. And so went and set up 3 long-term recovery groups in 3 different counties along the Pennsylvania and New York border. And then from that, the United Methodists have a national organization specifically for disaster called UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief. And so the leadership there came to me and said, now that you have volunteer experience and disaster experience, would you go ahead and lead UMCOR? And so I led the United Methodist presence for the U.S., Central and South America, and the Caribbean through UMCOR for 3 years. And then I was also sitting then on the board of National VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, as part of that. And then we needed a CEO for our organization. And so I applied for that position. And I've been serving as such for a little over 3 years now.
So you mentioned National VOAD. Can you explain what exactly that is, how it's organized, who's involved?
Certainly. So National VOAD came about, we're in our 50th year, pretty exciting. So 2020, we were formed in 1970. Came out of Hurricane Camille. And what it was is at that point in time, mostly it was denominational church groups that were doing disaster response and recovery in the United States. So VOAD actually predates FEMA. FEMA didn't get created until 1972. And so those, at that point in 1970, there was 7 organizations that came together, 6 faith-based and the Red Cross. And they were just looking to make sure that they weren't duplicating benefits and services to survivors in disaster. And from that humble beginning, they then started adding on more and more organizations that were working in not only post-disaster, but also in preparation, helping communities prepare for disaster. So our organizations, currently we have 78 what we call national organizations, which means they have a national footprint. 56% of them are faith-based. So we represent almost every faith walk that there is currently in the U.S. So we have 5 flavors of Baptist. We have 4 Jewish groups. We have a Sikh group. We have a Buddhist group. We have the Scientologists, Latter-day Saints, really, and 3 Catholic organizations. So really most of the faith-based, and that's 56% of our groups. And the rest are secular organizations that have stood up in disaster, similar to like Habitat for Humanity, SPCA, Team Rubicon, which is a veterans-based group. And so they have a national footprint. And then we now have starting in the late 80s, early 90s, we started adding on states. And so we have an organization in every state and territory across the United States. So there's 56 of those.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. And I think it's great that you've got the faith-based groups as part of it, because I know I was speaking with someone about the fact that there is such a natural volunteer base, because they said, you know, what other group meets weekly and connects all the time and is able to just mobilize so quickly. So that's fantastic. As far as, I know one of the other initiatives you guys do is, it's called DART, Disaster Agency Response Technology, I think. Can you explain a little bit about that technology piece and how that's enabled you to do your work?
Sure. So, you know, for years you rely always on the technology that's available to you. So you think back to the 70s, what our communication systems were, and it was very limited. And it really was Sunday based. When you look at, you could put information out every Sunday to recruit folks and everything. And then as we progressed over the years, you look at the cellular technology that then started with texting and other ways. And so we're able to actually generate then people volunteering through that kind of networking. What we have found more recently, as we're here in 2020, is we need to be better at communicating and aggregating information. And so what we've done with our DART technology is simply we needed a way to go ahead and manage volunteers. And so one of the modules, we developed a multiple module platform under DART, and one of the modules is volunteer management. And it came out of really the need of Hurricane Harvey. We saw more spontaneous volunteers looking to engage in Hurricane Harvey than we had in recent years. And we had to find a means by which to go ahead and get their information and be able to deploy them into the field. I wish I could say we did that very well, but we didn't. And we didn't have the right technology in place at the time. So in the last 3 years, we've developed that. And so now people can register online. Our member agencies can actually recruit from that membership pool, and we can set up incidences, or we can set up jobs, specific jobs, where volunteers can go ahead and sign into those pieces and volunteer there. The other module that we have that's available is in-kind donations. Donations become a secondary disaster many times after a disaster, and where people in their best interests or with the best of intentions want to donate goods and supplies. The problem is it's not always the right stuff at the right time in the right place. And so it becomes very problematic. And so what we have is now a platform where it's really geared towards corporations, where they can actually donate the supplies that are needed at the time that it's needed. And our member organizations can go ahead and accept those supplies. And then we also have agreements with shipping networks to be able to get them delivered to the right place at the right time. And then there's suggestions on there for individuals on how they can donate appropriately, whether that's clothing or food or otherwise, and really pushing the fact that money is best, because we can then purchase things that we need at the time that we need them. The third module that's in that DART platform is one around survivors. What we have found is in disasters, there's multiple agencies coming at survivors asking for the exact same information. And so they get hit, the survivors get hit for that information. We've developed a module called Client Connect, which captures 54 of the common data points that all of the agencies that we could find needed for their files. And so once we collect that from a survivor, we actually send that information back to them, to their smartphone, either in an email format or a text format, however is best. And then those survivors can then share it with whatever agency is looking for that information. So we're trying to minimize the impact on the survivor, but also letting them know what information is going to be required of them, and they can have it all in one place without having to redo it on a regular basis. And then the last module that we now have available is something under what we call disaster case management. And so disaster case management is long-term. We're in our third year of actually providing services for Hurricane Harvey in Texas right now. And what we needed was a new software system that could aggregate data in a much faster and comprehensive way, so that we could not only provide services for those that are affected now, but also learning on how we could go ahead and do things into the future. So that particular module has things on, I can now look at a community of houses that took 18 inches of water, that were of a certain type of construction, and I can tell you how many volunteer hours and how much it took to recover those houses. And so as we look to future events, we can now do some predictive analysis as to how many people it's going to take and what kind of dollars it's going to take to help recover a specific community.
Oh, that's fantastic, because all of those points that you hit on, the donations, the volunteer management, I mean, I know when I'm talking to communities, those are some of the key points that always continue to present challenges. And if they haven't thought about it in advance, it becomes a real pain for them. And so hopefully in having this kind of technology, this kind of solution that you have, they have some kind of capacity to deal with those situations much more effectively.
Yeah, we're hoping, and as that spreads and as the usage of these softwares spread, we can then go ahead and do a much better job at managing both people, but also in the resources that come into a community.
Yeah.
And if we communicate it well, we can go ahead and prevent some of the things that come into a community that actually cause an additional crisis, as opposed to being helpful.
Yeah. One of the things I'm just curious, in my background, it's always that business economic piece. So that recovery and helping make sure your business community doesn't fail. Is that any part of what you're looking at as far as the data? Or is it more just kind of the human side of things as opposed to the business piece?
No, we're highly connected. So within National VOAD, we're connected both within the private sector and also within government. So I look at it as a three-piece. When the three pieces are working together, government, nonprofit, and private sector work together, we can actually do whole community recovery in a much greater fashion and faster and more efficiently. And so we work very closely with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So I sit on a couple of different committees and boards with them to make sure that we're communicating with business. There's a great system out there called Sabre system that actually lets us know what businesses are open or closed in a disaster time period based on the card swipes that come across the different computer terminals and such. Yeah, so we can monitor that now along with business. We also work with them very extensively on logistics, supply logistics. So again, we're not bringing in things that we know that they're going to replenish their stores with.
Yeah.
But we also have to work with business in terms of how are the people that work in their stores going to get back to work.
Yeah.
So we look at housing situations around the areas where those stores are located, whether or not helping those places recover faster brings the businesses back online quicker. We work with government in terms of if communities are relocated, what kind of transit systems are available to take the workers back to the areas once businesses get back open. So it really has to be this very holistic approach to community recovery. And we're a piece of it. When we coordinate better with government and with business, it just makes everybody's life a lot easier.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point too, the resources are limited. And so you want to make the most of what you have, and you don't want to be tripping over each other. You want to make sure you've got this in advance. So that's fantastic. I'm thrilled that that's the kind of work you guys are doing. As far as outside of the US, are you aware of any other types of groups like yours?
Yeah, so there's a few, because over the years, again, we're in our 50th year, so the reputation of VOAD has come across. And so a few years back, about 5 years ago, the Japanese, after their tsunami and such, were looking at organizing what they call their civil sector a little bit closer. And so they sent representatives from Japan over from their nonprofits. And they have since gone back and set up their own JVOAD. And so they are organized across the country of Japan. They now have an operational agreement with the emergency management of the government of Japan. And so they deploy very similarly to what we do here in the US. The other that has just recently formed in the last about 18 months, maybe 24 months now, is in Canada. And so there's what they call a consortium of nonprofits. And what they do is very similar to National VOAD. They bring together the nonprofits to make sure they're having a conversation about what resources that they have should a disaster occur, and then how are they deployed alongside of governmental resources that are there. Those are the two big ones. In other countries, Australia has looked to us to talk about organizing. We work very heavily with the State Department, the US State Department, that brings in international disaster response people. And so normally on a quarterly basis, we're normally lecturing to the groups that are brought in to talk about how our nonprofit and our civil society groups go ahead and engage in disaster response and recovery alongside a government.
That's
a lot of the conversation too, I want to backtrack just a little bit. When we look at the 4 stages of what we could really consider a disaster, which is preparation, response, recovery, and mitigation, we're spending a lot more time now on preparation. What we're looking at is saying is, if you are prepared, as you and your family or you and your business are prepared for a disaster, then the resources needed to help you recover are going to be less.
Yeah.
And so our organizations now, and National VOAD is talking a lot about the preparedness side of things as we move forward.
That's great, because I know I've seen all kinds of stats, but the one I think it's a FEMA stat that talks to, for every dollar you put into that kind of mitigation preparedness piece, then you save $6 to $7 on the recovery. And you look at that and go, well, that seems like a very solid investment. But it is tough to get people talking about preparedness, because most people, I think, fundamentally believe it won't happen to them.
It is, and it's really interesting. So now when I get to lecture and I get to speak to a lot of different groups at conferences, even disaster professionals, I'll ask them right out. I said, so when was the last time you and your family have gone ahead and prepared or looked at a disaster response plan just for your needs of your family? And the response rate in disaster trained individuals is actually less than general society.
Wow.
Which is a shame. So we normally get a response rate, general society here in the U.S., we look at about a 20% actually have a disaster response plan of some sort that they've done within the last year. And what we've also found is it's normally those families that have children in elementary schools, because the police and fire department show up once a year. They do something with the kids in the school. The kids bring the paper home, and mom and dad fill it out and send it back. But as soon as you no longer have children in elementary school, the odds of you having a disaster response plan of any sort or have talked about it decreases very significantly.
So if I was an individual or an organization wanting to know more about, how to get involved with the National VOAD or an organization in my community, is going to your website the best place to go, or?
It is. So if you go to our website, NVOAD.org, you'll see a listing there of our members, and you'll see a listing of our national members and their websites and how to link in. And normally there's a link there also on how to volunteer with those specific national-based organizations. There's also a listing then of each of the states and the state chairs. And if you go into their websites, you may even find that there's also what we call COADs. And COADs are Community Organizations Active in Disaster. So many counties here in the U.S. Within a state, or many of the large cities, also have another subset of nonprofits specific to that geographic area. And so you can actually connect with them, and there may be one there right there in your hometown. There may be a group right there within your county. And so it makes it quite easy then to go ahead and figure out who the leadership is and see how you can volunteer with them.
That's great. So as we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to mention that maybe we missed?
Sure. So every year here in the U.S., National VOAD holds an annual conference. It's coming up in May. This year it'll be in Phoenix, Arizona. You'll see all the details listed on our website. How do we look at leading? We want to make sure that we're always teaching to what leading practices are. So we want to make sure we have learned from past disasters. And so each year at our National VOAD conference, we normally have 40 to 50 workshops that we put on based on those leading practices that have been garnered from the previous year's disasters. And we'll have leaders there from really all different nonprofits across the nation. And so I encourage you to come if you have the ability. If not, look for the resources that are on our website, and really look within your own community and connect. Yeah. If you do not have a disaster response plan for you and your family, now is the perfect time to do that. And so look for resources on either the FEMA website, disaster.gov, or go ahead and look at Red Cross has some terrific items to go ahead and help you prepare.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, Greg, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, and hopefully those watching will connect with their local VOADs, and wish you all the best as you continue to do this important work.
Thanks, Leanne. Appreciate you interviewing me.